Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's top business interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. And my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Paul Dupuis, who has come back to Japan after being away in India a few years, returned as the president and chairman of Randstad here in Japan. Paul, welcome back to Japan and good to see you again.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be back in, I guess, my second home. Just like you, huh?
Well, that's right. Well, your second home's probably more Kansai, I guess, seeing you spent 18 years in Kansai. I only spent 4 years there, but I loved it, like you did, no doubt.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you've been in Japan a long time. You've written a book, actually, 2 versions, the Indian version and the international version. Let me get those in shot. And it talks about leadership. So you've really, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I understand it is about your life journey and understanding leadership. So let's pick that theme up a little bit. And how did you get here to Japan? What have you been doing? And how is it that you became the head of Randstad in Japan? That's where we're trying to get to in terms of the backstory. So how did that work?
Wow. Well, 31 years. It's quite a story. I'll try to give you the short version, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And again, thanks for having me today. I originally came from Windsor, Ontario in Canada. Growing up in Windsor, I'd always had a fascination with Asia, like you. I share a passion for the martial arts. Mm-hmm. I was into karate growing up, and I had this dream to go to China, in fact, originally, to do Chinese Kung Fu. Okay. But that was for the, let's say, more mature folks watching today. That was 1989, and we all know what happened in 1989. So Tiananmen Square, China shut down. I had actually purchased a ticket, saved up everything I had to buy the ticket to Beijing. Had to go back to the travel agent back in the day when it was a thick set of carbon copies, the ticket, gave it back, got my money back, and I went to the public library to look for Plan B. And I remember climbing up the stairs to the Asia section, and on the top back shelf, there were some books on different Asian countries, and there was one on Japan. And I grabbed it. I knew nothing about Japan. It was a Lonely Planet guidebook.
Oh, okay.
And so I flipped through the book. I read about Hokkaido. I read about Tokyo, the center of the universe, the capital city and so on. And then I saw a couple pages on Osaka. And I remember clearly what it said in the Lonely Planet book. It said people in Osaka like to eat. Mm-hmm. They love sports. Mm-hmm. They like to drink. Mm-hmm. They speak their mind. It's like my hometown. I'm going to go there. Yeah. Right back to the travel agent, got a ticket to Osaka. So I arrived in 1990, September 5th, 31 years ago. Before internet, of course, with my Lonely Planet guidebook. Didn't speak a word of Japanese, didn't have a job. I had $300 Canadian in my pocket, which was probably about 23,000 yen, I think, at that time. And that was it. So my first night in Japan, I slept on a park bench in Osaka with a backpack as my pillow.
Really? So you couldn't even find any sort of cheap accommodation in Osaka?
No, I did later. I found where
it was later, right?
Oh, yeah. I found some.
So to get into Osaka at that stage, we would have had Kicks would have been operating.
No, I flew through Itami Airport.
Oh, you went through Itami?
Yeah,
okay.
through Itami Airport. Took a bus. Guessing where to go. There was no English at that time. You remember those days, but especially in West Japan, which I loved, by the way. It was just a completely different world. But yeah, I just found my way. And back in those days, before the internet, if you wanted information, you had to meet people. Yeah. And so, that's what I would do. I would gather where folks are gathering and share information, and then of course that led to contacts. And
so, how did you go for getting work? I mean, you've just arrived off the banana boat, literally, here in Japan. Yeah. No contacts, no money, don't know anyone. So you've got to start looking for a job. What was the first sort of work you were doing?
Well, I had one thing going for me. I spoke Canadian English in Osaka in 1990. Not that it's only Canadian English. Anyone who spoke English could have found a job. So I found a job teaching English. Okay. But again, it all began with where people hung out. And in that time in Osaka, there's an old bar called the Pig and Whistle. Legendary bar. It was the only one in Osaka where foreign travelers would visit. And I saw that in Lonely Planet. I tracked it down. And that's where I built my community. I made friends. I got information on job leads and so on, and found a job teaching English. Yeah.
Okay. And after, how long were you doing English teaching?
So I was in Japan for 5 years, 1990 to 95. I was teaching English in an English school, and then I moved to a high school. I worked for a public high school for about 3 years, and that was a great experience. That's actually where I was really learning about Japanese culture.
This wasn't part of the JET program?
No, in fact, there was a certain group of people in Osaka that were hired by the Osaka School Board.
Oh, okay.
But we were placed in very interesting schools. I was placed in South Osaka in one of the, let's say, one of the worst schools in Osaka when I tell people now. But again, great experience to kind of get, see the culture behind the culture in Japan. And then, of course, doing karate. I was doing karate, 6 nights a week, and that's where I started to pick up Japanese.
So, which style of karate?
Goju-ryu.
You're doing Goju-ryu
Yeah.
in Osaka. Okay, good. Yeah, I understand the 6 days a week karate. Yeah, I know that well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, so after teaching English, you then decide, okay, I've done this for a while.
Yeah.
I want to actually do something a bit more concrete, perhaps, or step it up. Or what was your next step?
Well, I think like a lot of us in Japan, we've gone through phases. And I hit the 5-year point. I spoke some Japanese. I had some experience. I was kind of heading towards my late 20s. And I wanted to go back to Canada and see if I could find my way there. So moved back to Canada, to Vancouver, to a city I'd never been to before, but being close to Japan in many ways, the Asia-Pacific Rim, I know, there were opportunities there. So I went back and I did a number of things. This is where I'm kind of finding myself. I was on that path to being a teacher, but I also had, business was always pulling at me. I was always kind of entrepreneurial and I liked the concept of business itself. So I had a number of jobs. I worked at the Hotel Vancouver, which is part of the Fairmont chain of hotels. I was a bellboy. I was a doorman. I wore the whole uniform, the cap and the white gloves, and I was a concierge. And then they offered me to move towards a management position. So I would have gone down the path of hotel management, eventually GM. At the same time, I applied for Teachers College to get certified as a teacher in British Columbia in Canada, and I decided to go that route. So I got accepted, went in, got certified as a teacher in British Columbia. So I was a high school teacher.
What was your SEMON? What was your major?
I did social studies, history, and geography, as well as Japanese as a second language, and PE as a minor.
Wow, okay. You covered a lot of bases for a school if you turned up
I was
there.
a utility guy. They'd call me in when I could fill in different roles.
Great.
Yeah.
And how long were you teaching there?
So 3 years lived in Vancouver, and then moved back to Japan, got married to a woman from Kobe.
As you do,
as the connection to Japan is strong. Moved back to Kansai. And then I landed a role at pretty famous, at least in Kansai, women's sort of, it's a girls' school starting from kindergarten straight up to a gakuen, straight up to university. So I actually was the director of their international education programs.
Okay.
So I wasn't teaching as much as I was sending students abroad. To Canada and New Zealand, in fact. So I was running that program. So that was a great experience. I got to see how education can be combined with business. And again, the commercial element, particularly in a private school enterprise. Great experience negotiating with airlines, with insurance companies, and so on.
And I guess in that type of arrangement too, probably you're it. You're like, you take care of the whole thing and you can run your own show there without someone telling you how to do it or telling you what to do. So that, which also must have been very
a lot of freedom to move as a young guy. Yeah, and I enjoyed it. But I think that's where I really got the bug for business. I've always been passionate about education. I continue to be. I mean, the way we learn, and we talk about leadership, it's so important when we talk about influencing and creating movements is to help people learn and develop. And so I use all those lessons I learned in the classroom and as a teacher. But then the commercial element was always very exciting. If you give great service, if you make a promise and you deliver on it, you get rewarded. I like that concept. And so then I made the leap fully into the business world when I left that role. Very comfortable role, by the way. And went entrepreneurial. And that was right at the time of the World Expo, so the Banpaku in Aichi.
Yeah.
So I started a company which was really about bridging between Canada and Japan, particularly in business. So if you talk about M&A, for example, a company in Japan in robotics wants to tie up with a company in Canada. So I was facilitating that. And I also managed to get the exclusive rights to the pavilion, the Canadian pavilion in Aichi at the World Expo. To use it for events related to this. So here I was, one guy starting a company. I'd never seen a P&L before. I didn't really know how it worked, but I knew that I had a passion for bridging cultures and in business. And so went at it and had a lot of support from friends in the Canadian government as well at that time in the foreign ministry. So did that, and that was going really well. And then I got a call from a guy that Nick Johnson.
Yes, I know Nick, yep.
So Nick was the founder, or one of the co-founders of Wall Street Associates.
Yep.
And if we go back into the recruitment story in Japan, he's a bit of a legend along with that first generation of folks. And Nick was, he had a small operation, about 20 people in Tokyo, and he wanted to come to West Japan. And he'd heard from someone that there's this Canadian guy in Kansai. If you want to start up, you should talk to him. So one thing led to another, and I was really intrigued by the notion of recruitment. Because again, it had all those elements, bridging, the service piece. But now we talk about impacting lives. I mean, recruitment to me is more than just putting people in a job. I mean, this is a vocation. You really have a chance to impact somebody's life in a big way. So Nick was, he's an entrepreneur. He was ambitious, wanted to come into West Japan, needed somebody to support him. And he wanted to work closely with that person as a partner, per se. So I jumped on board, and we opened up the Wall Street Associates office in Osaka.
So this is from zero, right? This is like
literally nothing. Literally
nothing there, right? Basically.
Well, not only that, and no knowledge of recruitment. I mean, so I came in to be the captain of a ship, and I knew nothing about the business itself.
Right.
And
so there were some staff. There was some.
No, there's nobody.
Nothing. You had to go and hire everyone.
There was no office. There was nothing. Yeah,
Okay, so you had to get the space, hire the people,
everything,
the works. Okay, all right.
Yeah, which again is an amazing experience to create from scratch. And that sort of becomes a common thread throughout my journey, which I write about in the book, stepping out of my comfort zone, challenging something I'd never done before, going somewhere I haven't been before, like many of us in Japan. We all ended up here because of curiosity, pursuing the curiosity. Whenever there's a challenge that kind of gets the adrenaline flowing, I'm in. That's always been,
Well, starting up a brand new Green Street operation from zero in Osaka, that'll get the blood pumping. So, how did you go? At that time, Wall Street wasn't a big company. No, I mean, it's turned into something that's mega now.
Yep.
But at that time, it wasn't very large. And in fact, I met Nick when it was about 20 people in Tokyo. And so here, you're in Osaka. You've got to get people to come and work for you. And it's not a big operation. And for a lot of foreign companies, that's not so easy because, the parents, like, who's Wall Street and Associates?
Yeah.
Is this company okay? And then the grandparents, don't go there. Sounds bad. So how did you convince people when you don't have a background in recruiting, it's a brand new operation, everything's new to everybody, to come and join us and we're going to go on this journey together? How did you do that? How did you convince people to come on board?
Well, it's a great question. And actually take it one step further. If you were a mom or dad or grandpa in Osaka and you Googled Wall Street, you didn't get Wall Street Associates. You got Wall Street in New York. So there was that element of, is this a bit, dodgy as well? And I learned a really important lesson at that time, Greg, which has stayed with me right to this very day. People don't join a brand. They join people. And people stay because of people. They also leave because of people. So I realized pretty quickly that ultimately I had to be the one that was going to attract people to join. So it had to be, of course, a combination of Nick's vision and so on, but the day-to-day, they'd be working with me. So I when I met people, I talked about what I stood for, how I viewed this thing called recruitment, which, by the way, for most people I met was brand new. What is it? How does it work? Because in Osaka, it really was early days. In hindsight, great time to go. First mover advantage was strong at that point.
So there were no other Western bilingual recruitment agencies?
No, several followed after they kind of started to hear that, we were making waves, we were getting traction, we were growing, we were profitable very quickly. Others came, many left as well. It's not an easy market. It's a very local market. You've got to be able to do business in Japanese. Helps to speak Kansai Ben. It's a local culture. And so, we were very fortunate. First mover advantage, attracted some great people who knew nothing about recruitment but learned from scratch, developed good habits from day one. And they continue to do well, as, of course, Wall Street then, as you know the story. We grew that office to about 40 people. Then I was responsible for opening up Nagoya, your old home, and work with some people you know very well in that town, by coincidence. Huh?
Yes.
Again, who were attracted to, I think, the story and the people more than the brand, came on board. We did really well there as well. And then continued to build across the country. And then we were acquired by N Japan, one of the top job boards, top 2 job boards in Japan, listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. And that was the moment to make a decision. Do you exit or stay on? And they asked me to stay on and lead the global expansion. So a conversation with Nick, who was going to exit after quite an event for him, And I decided to move to Singapore to lead the charge. Now, at that point, there was no brand to lead the charge. So one of the things I was tasked with was actually creating a brand. So the N-World brand was actually created on a whiteboard in Singapore, in my office in Singapore, along with Nick and a couple others. We brainstormed and we came up with the N-World brand, so made in Singapore.
Wow. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And in fact, we launched it first in Singapore. Wall Street continued to operate in Japan. And it was about a year later that the N-World brand was then rolled into Japan and rebranded. Yeah.
Interesting. So the operation in Singapore, that was, again, this was to do what in Singapore? To take the same operation into Singapore, play the same role there? Or was your job to make Singapore a hub and then start seeding, N-World Malaysia, N-World Indonesia, N-World Philippines? Was that the idea?
It was more the second scenario. First of all, it was brand new place, never been before, starting up a brand brand didn't exist. We had to create the brand N-World, right? So very similar story in that sense. And it was also starting up in other countries across APAC, including Hong Kong, Korea. We looked at acquisitions in Thailand, Vietnam, of course, Australia, and so on and so on. I was involved in acquisition discussions as well. So while I was responsible for starting up, launching the N-World brand, expanding it through APAC, I was also involved with M&A discussions. Another great experience.
Yeah.
We were on the seller side when we were Wall Street.
Yeah, exactly.
And now I was on the buyer side.
How nice is that?
Yeah, well, very interesting, actually, because you then kind of understand both sides of the table.
Yeah.
And of course, fast forward to Randstad, I've been involved in on the buyer side as well. So yeah, great experience. I really believe, Greg, if I push pause for a moment, everything you do in life, and I know you write about it in your book as well, everything you do in life comes through and is helpful today. It applies today. It's like a weapon. It's a tool in your box. And a lot of times we forget that thing we did 30 years ago is actually really important today. It's a tool in the box, but you got to use it. And I've been very fortunate to have quite a journey from a park bench in Osaka to today where I am. But I every step of the way, I think about the tools that I've gathered and I try to use them. And the M&A story is one of those, obviously.
So
sitting across from
the N-World Singapore story, how long did that go on for?
So I stayed there, it was just over 2 years. And that's an interesting story too, because we were doing really well. We were profitable pretty quickly from a pure startup in a very crowded market. It's a small market and it's extremely crowded with global players and local players. So we were profitable pretty quickly. It was going well. And, maybe a bit of serendipity like everything in life. It's always about relationships and the people you meet and kind of, impact the decisions you make. And I was at a conference in Singapore and there was a woman from Randstad who was up on stage speaking and was really telling the Randstad story, the history of Randstad, how the company was started in the small town in the Netherlands and on the way, at that time, not global number one, on the way though, number two. And I was just intrigued by her story of this company, because we thought we were big at Wall Street. We got to a few hundred people. We thought we were huge. And then I see this global giant Randstad, and I was just so curious. How does a company in our industry get to that
size?
Especially started by one person in a small town, and now a global giant. So I went up to her, introduced myself. I'd love to have a coffee with you to learn more. I wanted to learn about the story. Well, we met. And then, of course, here we are. I got a call a little while after that meeting saying, hey, there might be an opportunity for you in Japan. And I had just moved to Singapore 2 years earlier from Japan. And I thought, so then the discussion went on, and I ended up coming on board at Randstad in 2013 in Tokyo. Moved back from Singapore to Japan.
And when you came back to Japan, what was your role with Randstad at that time?
So at that time, we had 3 managing directors. I was one of the managing directors, and I was responsible for transformation, really turnaround and transformation of a couple of the key business lines, including what we call professional search and selection, higher-end recruiting, perm, which has always been very weak. And within Randstad globally, we've been known as a temporary staffing company, contracting company. So this has always been kind of an area that I think we found challenging, especially in Japan, where we're really a staffing company. So I sort of was brought in to turn it around. So we broke it down to nothing and rebuilt it, and proud to say we're one of the leaders in the industry here in Japan.
So how long was it between coming back to Japan and then they said, okay, I want you to go and run India?
So 2013 to 2017 was a really intense experience here in Japan, putting us on the map, working with the team to really grow the business and also diversify, launching new lines of businesses, building those as well, entering in that professional space. Things were going really well. And here's another pattern that emerges. Just when you're in your comfort zone, something comes, right? So I was actually finally over the hump and was doing well and enjoying our success here when I was actually, I'll never forget, because I was at INSEAD in France, and I was doing something we call the Senior Executive Program. Randstad is a big believer in learning development. One of the reasons I really, really enjoy working in this company, invest in their people. And I know you have a passion for L&D. But I was at INSEAD doing this course. Our vice chairman, who was our global CFO, came over from Amsterdam, spoke to our group. These are all senior leaders.
This is a Randstad.
It's a Randstad specific customized program from INSEAD. Yeah.
Right.
And when he was finished, everyone stood up to go out, and he said, "Paul, let's go have a chat." And I remember everyone kind of razzing me, saying, "Oh, you must have done something wrong. So the big boss wants to talk to you." And he's a great guy. He's been a mentor for me for many years. So we went in the room next door, and he said, I'll never forget this moment because it's kind of classic. He said, "So things are going well for you in Japan." I said, "Yeah, thank you, Robert Jan. Yeah, it's been what a journey." He said, "Good, it's time for a change." And I remember the moment where sort of, for one brief millisecond, I thought, what do you mean it's time for a change? And then flick a switch, yeah, it is time for it. He's right. He's right. And so then he put a couple options on the table, and then he did what the great leader does and sales guy. And then he said, then there's the third option. He took off his glasses and said, "How about India?" And we had a laugh, and I said, "Of course, it's option number 3, right? That's the one you would suggest." "Yes." "Okay." And then he described Randstad India. Wow, what a talk about being under the comfort zone.
How big was Randstad India at that time?
Massive.
When we talk massive, I mean, we've got Dale Carnegie in India too. It's
good
massive
point.
There, what's the
you
scale?
add zeros to everything. Well, let me put it in perspective for you. So first of all, India is 10 times the population of Japan. So you might as well 10x everything you talk about. But we also need to think about, when you talk about our market, what we do, it's directly connected to wages. And the wages in India are much, much lower than in Japan, a fraction. So while the business is huge, when it comes down to rupees to euros, it would be smaller than Japan, but still sizable. It's about 300 million euros in India. We had 1,300 full-time staff across 50 plus offices, 52 locations across the huge country. And here's the big one, 57,000 temporary contractual workers working for Randstad that we put to work every day in India. Massive.
That's a logistical challenge, isn't it?
Well, when you think about India, unlike Japan, India is 29 states with some territories. Well, let's say it's 29 states with over 100 languages, not dialects, languages. So as I learned quickly in India, there's no such thing as one India. It is unified in many ways, but it's kind of the United States of India, but very different from north to south. From A to Z, from language to culture.
And where were you based?
I was based in Bangalore.
So why were you based in Bangalore, not in Mumbai or New Delhi?
Yeah, and it's interesting because before I went to India, I knew nothing about India other than Delhi was the capital city, and Mumbai was where Bollywood was based, and those were the two big cities. I had never heard of Bangalore, as I quickly came to realize it's the fastest growing city in India. It's the IT hub. All multinationals have big operations there, and so on. A little bit of fate, I think, on that one was that. So similar to Japan, where we acquired a company called Fuji Staff, in India we acquired a similar company, similar size, called Ma Foi, very well-known brand in the Indian market, recruiting staffing market. They had their headquarters in Chennai on the East Coast, and the previous MD had wanted to move the headquarters, not the legal headquarters, let's say the leadership team, to Bangalore because of the access to great talent, because it was a fast-growing city. A lot of multinational companies, you have this natural talent pool there. And he was right. Plus, it's 1,000 meters elevation, beautiful weather all year round.
That sounds good to me.
Wonderful. It's called the Garden City.
Right.
And
So
you
how
see
many
that when you're
people
there.
working there for you at that time when you got there?
So about the same number. I think we grew from, I arrived at about 1,100. We're at 1,300 when I left.
Okay.
But in terms of the temporary workers, we went from 57,000 to 66,000. Yeah.
Wow. And okay, so how many years there altogether?
4 years.
4 years, and then back to Japan.
Yeah.
And how big's Randstad now in Japan?
So Japan, we are one of the leading countries within the world of Randstad. I can't really get it specific into numbers, but in
that's
terms
okay.
of our size, we're over 2,000 core employees, heading towards 30,000 temporary contractual workers that we put to work across the country. Yeah.
So let's talk about leadership then, because you start with 0 people in Osaka and build it up to 40 people. And then it just keeps growing as you get more and more responsibility. And then you start again in Singapore, I guess, again. But in terms of just contrasting, what were some of the early discoveries about the existing toolboxes you already had about leading that weren't apparent to you until you got into that commercial position of having a P&L, having responsibility for people, having run a business? And when you just start to realize, okay, well, actually, I need this tool, I need this tool, I need this tool, or I don't have a tool for that, I need to go and get a tool for that. What were the sort of things that occurred to you when you first started leading? What were the challenges?
So leadership, first of all, let's back it up a little. Leadership is a never-ending journey.
Right.
I would say it's even like it's a series of muscles. And Arnold Schwarzenegger said this, you don't just walk into the gym and get in shape.
No.
You got to do the work. So you walk in the gym, then you do the work. And not only that, specifically, if you want to build a particular muscle, you got to do the work for that muscle. You got to hit that muscle. I think it's the same thing with leadership. So if we talk about qualities of the exceptional leaders, which I explore in my book, and I'm a passionate student of leadership through genres and over history, they share some common traits. There's a whole bunch. One of those is they're motivated by purpose, not by outcomes.
So let's relate that to you're in Osaka. It's a new team. You're starting off. So how did that come from running that team that occurred to you, or was that already in your mind and you applied that to the business? Which came first, the application or the insight?
I think if we go back to Osaka, that was the first real commercial experience I had as a leader. So I would say that one was kind of happening simultaneously. The lessons learned in the karate dojo, the lessons learned on the ice hockey rink, you know, as a volunteer, as a student council president in a high school and so on back in Canada. A lot of those lessons came into play. But one thing I realized
And
is...
what were those lessons?
one of those is walk the talk.
Right, okay.
Walk the talk. I always come back, and I did this when I joined Wall Street. I always came back to what kind of leader would I follow? I want to be that leader. And to me, that's the key. That's the key point to effective leadership is, define the leader that you would follow. And for me, I would follow a leader who walks the talk. I would follow a leader who is transparent and honest. I would follow a leader who has my back in good times and bad. That pushes me when I need to be pushed and gives me a high five when I deserve a high five. So I defined that leader at that time, and I wanted to become that leader. And so those were kind of my guiding principles.
So often as a leader, we have values, we have concepts which are pertinent to us, but often the people who work for us are not us. So how did you go trying to understand that what works for you may not necessarily be the motivator or the engagement exercise for the people who are working for you? How did you bridge across to that?
It's a tough one. That's part of the maturity curve of being, I think, an exceptional leader, and also being a leader who can build something that's scalable. And we've seen it in recruitment boutique firms. The mini-me syndrome, right? Many boutique firms get to about 20 people. And if you walk in that office, they're full of mini-me's. In other words, they're kind of clones of the founder or the owner and the CEO. And that works, and that's fine. But if you really want to build something scalable as a leader, to your point, you need to build a team that's rooted in diversity. And diversity is about diversity in how you see the world. It's not about Japanese or not Japanese. In my mind, diversity is about lenses on how you see the world. Introvert versus extrovert, conservative, cautious versus, adventurous, and so on. So I realized pretty quickly that that I couldn't create an office full of mini-me's if we really wanted to scale and build something special. So yeah, that was a tough moment because I had a hard time connecting with the people who were very different from me. But there was a kind of a hallelujah moment. I think part of that was discussions with Nick. I'm a real big believer that as leaders, you should always have somebody to lean on, a mentor, unofficial or official. You should have people you can bounce your frustrations, ideas off of, questions. And Nick was great for that. Other leaders I knew around me that I'd bounce it off of. So when I learned that actually the role of the leader is not to be the one who kind of creates a cookie cutter approach to everything, but actually helps each person shine. When I realized that, the true mission of Peter Drucker said it, right? Peter Drucker said that the mission of the leader is not to be the smartest person in the room, but to make a positive impact on the world. The moment I realized that, my mission was to help every person around me shine. Then it opened up incredible opportunities. But that took a while. That took a while. I had a hard time connecting with people that were different than me. But that's one of the key qualities of the exceptional leader, being able to connect with people from all walks of life and ways of seeing the world.
And also communication styles too, because we all have our preferred communication style, yet others don't hear what we say because they've got a different communication style. When did you start to realise that you needed to have a number of different communication styles depending on who you're talking to?
You had a guest who's a common friend of ours, Harry Hill. And Harry and I are old friends from way back in the day. And I remember one time when I visited Shop Japan, way back in the day in Nagoya, and he mentioned this thing called omni-channel. And that's when I was just kind of ramping up with Wall Street and ramping up the organization in West Japan. And I studied omni-channel, tried to understand how it worked within the marketing framework. And my team will tell you, I talk about omni-channel all the time now. Because omnichannel is really about how you touch people, how you communicate with people. And it's about touching people in different ways and mediums and so on. And I would say that was actually triggered by a conversation I had with Harry.
So he's talking about omnichannel in the sense of Shop Japan is a online consumer marketing company. And so they're thinking of how do we get in front of as many buyers as possible, appeal to them from as many angles as there are angles necessary. But now we're talking about leading people. So how did you apply that omni-channel concept to the people?
So actually, everything you said right there could be paraphrased for leadership, right? Okay. So if you think about this, every human being has buttons, motivational buttons. So I lead a large, complex organization here in Japan. We'll have the salespeople in the room. We know what their buttons are. And we will automatically, as sales guys, we'll connect with them immediately. We know exactly which buttons to put. We can talk about winning. We can tap into the competitive spirit, the reward, both monetary and on stage, all of those things that salespeople love, right? Achievement. If I'm talking with my risk and compliance team, those are not the buttons to push. That's omni-channel for me. That's one element of omni-channel. So when you're talking to the risk
and compliance, what's the switch? What does the switch you make there?
Well, first of all, we talk about what is their purpose. And what they'll tell you is their purpose is to protect and enable. Are we doing everything we can do to both protect the business while enabling the business? And it can't be one or the other. It has to be both. Because protecting, sometimes you end up being a blocker. And so we introduce that commercial element. Team loves it. The fact that they can not only protect, they can enable the business to achieve the goals. So, I think it's always about the audience you're speaking to, but the common message should always be there and always comes back to values. I'm a big believer in values of the leader. Your personal values should always gel with the organization you work with. Randstad has several key values. One is to know, to serve, and to trust. I mean, that's at the core of who I am as a person. And so I'm working in a company that, I share the values. And so I talk about the values often. That should be a common denominator. If you're a salesperson or if you're that risk and audit person, you should share that value, which is to know, to serve, to trust.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. And that's often the case that we have leaders in the C-suite, it's the top floor of the building, the carpet is plush, the plants are green and luxurious, it's very quiet, very nice. And they are pontificating about values, they're pontificating about vision, they're pontificating about mission. It's up there and everyone's got it, except they don't got it. And I know that myself because we're as a training company, we go into some of your competitors as well, or any company particularly that have got these things on the wall, vision, mission, values, take it off the wall, turn it around, no one can see it, 30 people in a class. What's the vision of the company? Silence.
Yeah.
What's the mission of the company? Silence. What are the values of the company? 30 people will come up with 2 or 3 of the 5 values. So it tells you that the people at the top believe they're communicating, they believe that they're enthusing the team with the right values, the right concepts, etc. But in many cases, it's not filtering down. So what did you find was useful to break through that barrier to make sure that, yes, we the executives have really understood it, but are all of the middle managers driving that messaging down to the bottom? Because we can't be in every office every day. We have to go through our leadership cohort. So how do you get that message down to the bottom?
So it's not easy, especially the larger the organization you lead, the easier it is to be out of touch, as you said. So I sit here in downtown Tokyo. Do I really know how our people feel in Miyazaki right now? I need to know. So there are a few things you can do, and there's something that I do, something I use called pulse checks. There's 2 things, pulse checks and compass meetings. Pulse checks are exactly that. You got to get your finger on the pulse. Now, a leader needs to walk that balance between what you described now. Some people say 30,000 feet. I think 30,000 feet is way too high. If you're at 30,000 feet, you can't see or hear what's happening on the ground. So I would rather be a leader who's strategic at 100 feet and then down that tree into the mud. And knowing when to be in the mud and when to be up high to look at the landscape, to look at the opportunities and the threats and so on. That's kind of let's say, the art of leadership. Too much time in the mud, then your head's in the sand. Too much time up top, then you're removed from the reality. So pulse checks are actually conversations that I have with people with no clear agenda, no PowerPoint decks allowed, no presentation.
Are these nowadays, are these physical or is this on Zoom? Or
we'd always do them face-to-face, but right now we're using Hangouts. We're on the Google platform. So and it's 30 minutes with me, and it's at all levels of the organization. So I've come in now, this is my 25th day in the seat here at Randstad in Japan, and I'm on a mission to meet 100 people in the organization, mission 100, face-to-face, one-to-one.
Is this something that, you went from Singapore with N-World to back to Japan, then from Japan back down to back to India, and it's a bigger organisation obviously. But were you doing the same thing? Is this something that you realised you needed to do in India, and now you brought that back to Japan and you're using it, or have you been doing pulse checks when you had 40 people, or when you came back to Japan, you were one of the general managers building up that more upper level recruitment business? Is this a consistent thing you've done, or is this something you learned to do, which you've now adapted it to here?
Back to the journey in the toolbox, I think there have been different iterations of what I'm doing right now. But certainly if I go back, I didn't call it pulse checks, but I had a lot of coffees with people back in the days of Wall Street to really understand how they were feeling. And it's guided by something really important, something my dad taught me. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Right? God gave us, he used to say, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So listen. So it's about listening. It's also a trap for many leaders, and I've been there before, where we immediately default to telling rather than listening. But you get so much when you listen first.
As a leader, when did you start to realize, actually most of this conversation is my voice here, and they're not saying anything. Maybe I better shut up and ask them a question. How soon was it before that
I think
tweet?
It was partly in the business environment, but probably more so when I became a dad and had young sons growing up and realized that I was falling in that trap of telling rather than listening. Okay. And then what I said earlier, what you might learn in one arena and one environment is a tool in your box that you bring into the next one. And so, those lessons came with me. But, I started to realize, because it was proof of concept, when you listen more than you speak, ideas are born. When you're speaking more than you listen, you're repeating something that you already know. If you really want to learn something new, it starts with listening. It also starts with asking the right questions. And that's where I learned the power of open-ended questions.
So, you've been a student of leadership, you've written the books on it, and you're really motivated. So how do you take that conceptually and drive that down the organisation? Because in a lot of cases in Japan, the leaders are not, I would say, trained. They are exposed to one person's style of leadership, who's their immediate boss, so it's on-the-job training, and they see a certain way of things are done. But that real study, that real getting involved, experimenting, learning, that doesn't seem to be much of a part of that on-the-job learning process in Japan. Maybe it was 40 years ago, 50 years ago, but it's sort of dried up because most bosses are too busy to coach anybody. They're not motivated to study themselves. They seem to be just struggling to get through the day-to-day with all the work they've got. So how do you inculcate that mindset into your mid-level managers, be it India, be it here or wherever? What do you do to help them understand there are other possibilities for them to be great leaders too?
Well, I'll go back to the phrase I used earlier, walk the talk. For example, we have a town hall later this week. All employees will be on board, and we'll make some interesting announcements. I think that will get people excited. One of the things we're going to talk about is learning, and how learning and development now will become a very important priority for us moving forward in Japan. It always should be in any organization. Invest in your people. It's the best investment you're going to make, right? Especially in their development. But I also will talk about books that I like, or books that I'm reading. So this Thursday, they're going to hear about Pour Your Heart Into It by Howard Schultz, the story of Starbucks.
Yeah.
I will talk about Good to Great, which for many of us is a Bible, and you probably know it. At Wall Street, it was our guidepost, and it's been with me for many years. So I think you have to walk the talk as a lifelong learner if you want to create a culture where people are learning, and also provide opportunities for them to not just suggest that they do it, provide forums where they can actually learn. So yeah, in India, I would say we took learning and development from being a low priority, probably lowest priority on the totem pole, and we put it up probably near number one. And we went on a mission to develop our people, especially our high performers or high potentials.
Which is interesting for me because the thing, we have Dale Carnegie in India. Obviously, we've been there a long time and we teach a lot of companies there. But the feedback I get is how absolutely hungry the working population in India, in at least white-collar jobs at least, are to learn. Like they really see that as their step up.
Yeah.
They're hungry. And it's just interesting that wasn't such a high priority until you got there and you sort of lifted it up. What about here, though? What is the culture here, you think, in Japan? Is there that hunger here to learn, to really step it up like you have in India? Do you get that feeling like, oh, I really feel the Indians are hungry? I don't get the sense that the Japanese are so hungry. That's the feeling I have. We have our Dale Carnegie regional meetings, like our conventions every 2 years. We have an international one every year. And we go to, Phuket, or we go to Vietnam, or we go somewhere. Whenever I'm there, I'm always struck by how hungry everybody else is. They're like, everybody's so hungry. And then I come back to Japan, everyone's so comfortable. And I often think to myself, wow, it's such a contrast. But that's my impression. How about your impression around, can we get this hunger going in Japan too?
It's a fair assessment. To the last point, I think we absolutely can light that fire. I think all human beings, regardless whether they're comfortable or not, will embrace an opportunity. At least, let's say, the audience that we're looking for. Surround yourself with great people and you can achieve great things, right? So the A players in my book are always ready to learn. And we've proven that time and time again. But to your point about India, I think there are some cultures and some countries that are rising economies, the up and coming economies, younger countries like India, 29 years old average age.
Yeah,
Japan's 43, right?
young.
And getting younger, right? And so, clearly the energy and the passion around learning is very strong. And it's also displayed. India is a very emotional culture, quite different than Japan. So if we would announce to someone that they're going to be sent on a program, sometimes the people in the room would be crying. They were so happy to be able to be sent on a 1 week program somewhere. So that's not to say that I think the Japanese are not passionate about learning. I mean, the A players that I surround myself with, they're always keen to talk about learning opportunities, to learn, to talk about books I've read, to brainstorm, to throw ideas back and forth. I think that creating that learning culture is one of the things that a great leader brings, and it can be done anywhere. I think that's borderless. I'm aiming to do that here.
Did you have that in Osaka? Did you bring that to Singapore? Did you have that in Tokyo the first time you came back here to run or to be in Randstad as a general manager? Is that something you've sort of brought with you consistently?
Yeah, very much. And to the credit of the Wall Street days, Nick also believed in continuous improvement. It was one of the core values on the wall. Constantly be improving, continuous improvement, right? And so I really connected with that. And we didn't have the resources to do INSEAD or whatever, but we did programs. We did lots of interesting things where we had chances to develop our people. We had what we called teachbacks, right? Where someone would read an article or a book or something, and they would have their moment to teach back to colleagues, regardless of the level. So those were the early days, the roots. Did that in Singapore, continued that culture as well. But then joining Randstad, discovered a company that really genuinely is passionate about learning and development. And we know that this is a very competitive industry. There's 20,000 staffing and recruiting companies in Japan alone.
20,000 in Japan, my God.
Just in Japan alone. So think about that. You have choices. At the end of the day, a brand is a brand, but behind that brand are the values. And if you're going to build a career, join somewhere that's going to invest in you and develop you. So I think it's early days here in Japan. We're doing some interesting things, but I'd like to do a lot more. I'm not satisfied. I think we can do a lot more. I think the lessons I learned in India and on the by the way, the more we developed our people, the lower our attrition rate was, and in India,
that's a big
turnover
deal.
rate. Oh, we cut our attrition rate in half in India.
Wow, that's a big deal in India.
And of course, performance also follows. Isn't it interesting? What a formula. Invest in people, develop them, they stay, and they perform better.
Yeah. So thinking about things in Japan that are important, like we talk about engagement, and every time I see Gallup annually publish these global engagement scores, and you see the one for Japan, and it bounces around between, highly engaged, like 5 to 7% of the population, right? And you read this stuff, you go, oh my God, that's pretty low, to have highly engaged, only 5 to 7%. So what are your thoughts on how you encourage people to feel more engaged? Because obviously, if you look at these consistent results, there's a big 93% or maybe 95% chunk of the population who are not highly engaged, who are not your A players, who are not the people you're surrounding yourself with, but who are out there in Miyazaki or, Sapporo, or, wherever they are, working every day for the company. How do you get those people to really become more engaged?
So important, no? And tougher when you have as many locations as we do as a large company and out of sight. Different than when you have one room of 30 people where you can hear everyone breathe. You really have your finger on the pulse. And there's a charm to that, right? It's tough, Greg, to be frank, and it's something that I wrestle with often. I go back to what we did in India. I certainly have learned some important lessons that I'd like to apply here in Japan. Our engagement scores were very low when I arrived. Right. And we saw that as an outcome of the things we weren't or were doing.
Right.
Okay. So I think the same is true in Japan. One difference about Japan, and I really don't like, because I'm part of a global company, global organization, just like you, 38 countries. I don't want to stand on stage and tell all my colleagues around the world that Japan's different. Because the guys in Spain can say, Spain's different. And the guys in Portugal and the folks in the US and China can say the same. But there is one thing about Japan that we know, it's been proven, and it's in the data, NPS scores as well. Yep. There needs to be a curve when you look at these kinds of rankings and ratings, particularly around engagement, customer satisfaction, and so on. In Japan, generally people don't give a 10. We know that. Now, an 8 in Japan may equal a 10. So there's a bit of a bell curve there.
An 8 in Japan probably equals a 15. But
Maybe,
anyway.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Great. I see it with my book on Amazon. If I get 3 stars in Japan, that's considered, 5 or 6 elsewhere. So engagement's a tough one to really measure. And I think it comes back to, you look for the evidence of engagement. Of course, performance is part of it, but that's output. You look at attrition, turnover rate. That's a key element. You look at new ideas that are generated from the ground, from the front line, the new ideas that are born. that's a sign of engagement. You look at things you do outside of the day-to-day business, whether it's CSR or what activities you have, how involved are they? All of these are, in a way, pulse checks of engagement. But we're about to launch something that I think is going to be very interesting, which I could talk about in a future session, about how to improve and strengthen our engagement in Randstad Japan, because I'm not satisfied. I think we should be much more engaged than we are right now.
Well, just let me pick up on something you said there, which is very interesting about ideas, because in a very logical, obvious thing is if someone doesn't care to make it better, they're not engaged enough. If they're just not engaged, they don't care. And the mousetrap, I don't care if we make a better mousetrap because I just don't care. So you really need to have that first step of people being engaged to have ideas. And that's one part of it. Okay, do they have something in them that says, well, I think we could do it better around here. I've got some ideas on how that might happen. The problem, though, in a lot of companies is those ideas are slaughtered at the very, 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 very beginning stage. Yeah. And they never go anywhere, either because that person looks around and says, this is not a culture where ideas are welcomed. This is not a culture where people at my level with ideas are welcomed. And I feel fear that if I step out of my comfort zone, you've mentioned comfort zone probably, if I go back into the transcript, probably 20 times, we've had this conversation. You've been able to continually step out of your comfort zone. But in Japan, for a lot of people, stepping out of the comfort zone is a very culturally concise, clear picture of how you live here. Don't step out of your comfort zone. To get them to do that and to come up with ideas, what are you able to do, or what are you doing to encourage people to bring ideas up? Because it is such a waste, I believe, in Japan, of so many ideas that potentially they're latent, but they never see the light of day.
No, I absolutely agree. I think this goes back to the definition of what the leader's role is. And we grew up in a similar generation where the leader was the one who knows.
Yep.
You go to the leader for the answer. You could take it one step further, almost like a guru. In Japan, a sensei. Yeah. The leader was like a sensei, right? Yeah. Well, nowadays, if you want to know something, you're literally a couple seconds away from Google. Yeah. I mean, that role of the leader has been diminished. The leader is now the enabler. And how you enable? Well, you find out what people are passionate about, what they're good at, and you help them shine. And how do you do that? You have to have those conversations. So it's a couple of things. The pulse checks are one way to do that. I ask a question, if there's something you would bring.
That's you up here. Again, the vast majority of people are not being led by you because they've got their direct supervisor. So what about, are you able to bring that pulse check concept into your middle management? Are you able to bring into that middle management the idea that we've got a lot of great latent ideas here at Randstad? Your job is to create an environment to get these out. Is that what's happening here? Or is it still walking the talk, I'm setting the standard and you see what I'm doing, you should be doing it too? I mean, how do you get it from up here down here?
Yeah, so it's early days. We've just begun. I'd say we've triggered the first steps of this by launching something called Compass meetings. Okay, so the pulse checks are one-on-ones with me. I'm meeting 100 people, and I'll continue to do this until the end of time. One-on-ones at all levels. We talk about skip levels. To me, skip level goes right to the very front line. That 23-year-old who just joined us in Sapporo, I'm going to talk to. So that's one. And then also getting ideas from them and bringing those ideas to the table, to the leaders. But the Compass meeting is very interesting because what that is actually my direct reports and their direct reports. So now we're going down 3 layers in the company. And these are the people in an organization. Those are the people that move the wheels. They're the ones who will make or break bringing that vision to life. And the Compass meeting is actually reaffirming that we're actually heading towards the North Star. There's a couple simple rules of engagement in that one. No numbers. So many of us who grew up in a world where you default to presenting numbers to your boss, guess what? In the Compass meeting, it's not about numbers. That's why we have reviews. We'll deal with that later. So it starts with a conversation about people, about who the superstars are, any success stories related to people. So in the Compass meeting, it always comes back to people. And from that, ideas are born. So we've launched the first series of this. We're doing it with every single line of business, which is a lot in Randstad Japan, every single enabling function, from marketing to legal to IT to finance, keep going. And it's really interesting. We've only been doing it for a few weeks now. Really interesting what's coming. We're getting golden nuggets already. Then in the second round, we'll take it to the next level. Then I would like to launch something which I haven't announced yet, but I'll announce it right here with you.
Oh, we've got a scoop.
A scoop.
Okay, folks, pay attention. Scoop here.
I'm going to borrow from, Isaac Newton said, we see farther when we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Correct.
Okay? So Shark Tank, right? It's a TV show where people entrepreneurs pitch to an investment panel, right? Very successful people. So we're going to launch something called the Shark Tank inside Randstad. It's going to be an idea generation forum where everybody gets a chance, and particularly the people you're talking about, the people that don't normally have a voice are going to have a chance to present ideas. And by the way, if their idea is supported, accepted, approved, they get to lead it. And they'll get some recognition and even get rewarded for it as well. So to sum up the answer to your question, I think you got to make it cool to come up with new ideas. You got to create a culture where, ideas are welcome. Now, at the end of the day, you can't act on every single idea.
No.
But you can take the time to listen to ideas. And you know what? I actually learned this now that we're talking about this. I just had a flashback from 1985 to 1990. I was a welder at Chrysler on the assembly line in Windsor, Ontario. That was the Dodge Caravan, the minivan, the very first minivan. Lee Iacocca, when he was CEO, invented it, right? And I was a welder. And I remember at the end of every shift, they started this new thing. They called it the Quality Control Circle. It was borrowed from the TPS, Toyota Production System. Toyota was up and coming at that time. They would stop the assembly line 5 minutes early at the end of the shift. And all these big guys, in the welding gear, whatever, in the overalls, would come over, sit around this big orange plastic picnic table in the factory. There's pencil and little squares of paper. And you could write one idea on there and put it in the basket. They did it at the end of every shift. And if you didn't have an idea, you didn't have to do it, but you got 5 minutes in. People, stopping the line for 5 minutes was a blessing, especially on the hotter days. And from those sessions were amazing ideas. Amazing ideas were born that not only impacted the little world that we were in, but it impacted the entire factory. They were efficiency ideas. They were ideas on how to do things better, better quality, so on. And then these people got recognized and rewarded for it. So that worker on the assembly line, that front line worker, blue collar, contributed an idea in one of those after work sessions that then became something that the company adopted, and that person was celebrated. That's I think, an exceptional culture. And I think that can be introduced in any environment, whether you're leading a company of 20 people or 2,000 people.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. A big part of that too is trust, isn't it? Because I'm sure you've run across this too, that the really excellent idea of someone at the bottom is noted by their boss, who takes that idea, amazingly rebrands that idea as their own amazing contribution to their boss and say, hey, boss, I got this great idea. And that person's idea is suddenly, no longer theirs. And there's that trust element, isn't it? So if your boss is stealing your ideas as becoming their own, how enthusiastic are you to come up with the next great idea to your boss? So it comes back to that idea of culture, it comes back to the idea of trust. So trust is a big deal everywhere. I don't know much about how you get trust in India or Singapore, because I've not worked in those two environments, but I've lived here a long time. What are your views on trust in Japan? You've got a big organization here. Yes, you've got to walk the talk. That's one element of trust. How else do you develop a sense of trust inside the workforce in Randstad?
Yeah, if you give me $1 million, I can't buy trust, huh? It's something that is earned, and it's not one thing. I think certainly walk the talk is one of those things. But I think if come back to my stance, and probably Greg, you might have the same view. But if you were to look at the leader you would follow, you would follow a leader who you trust. Okay, how did you come to trust that leader? Because because that leader supported you in good times and bad, as I said earlier, right? That leader went the extra step to understand how you're feeling, what's in your head, and so on, helping you shine and so on. That leader rolled the dice on you, maybe, when you were struggling sometime. Or maybe you made a mistake. And instead of knocking, the leader said, come on, we're going to get this right together. You know, I think all of that comes together. There's one more point. I think this is really undervalued. It's consistency. I don't want to follow a leader. I won't follow a leader who's inconsistent. And we've all seen those leaders. Don't talk to that leader today because he's in a bad mood.
Exactly, yeah.
I would not follow a leader who's inconsistent like that. I want a leader who's consistent in purpose, in values, and behavior. We all have our moments, eh? But it's important to stay in a zone. So I want to be that leader, and I think that's how you earn trust. There is something about consistency. And finally, let's face it, in touch. The out-of-touch leader will not earn trust. The in-touch leader will. It's a very simple formula. So how do you stay in touch? You do things like pulse checks, do compass meetings. The other thing is road shows. I am really hungry to get on the road and ride those Shinkansens and travel this country and go to every single location and listen to people. And of course, you know, talk about our vision, talk about our values and so on. And by the way, we'll get to the output. We'll get to the results.
What percentage of people are actually outside of Tokyo for Randstad?
Oh, good question. Large percentage. I mean, we're largely, in terms of our footprint in Japan, we're actually largely in the villages and the mountains.
Right.
Okay. It makes us unique from a footprint perspective because most companies in our industry are very strong in the big metros, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka. Or actually, we're strongest in a lot of the locations where our competitors aren't. That's always kind of been our secret weapon. But part of that was the acquisition of Fuji Staff. Fuji Staff was always strong in those areas. So the large percentage of our employees are outside Tokyo, actually.
Well, you know, let's talk a little bit about your book because, you know, there's something like the official number. You know, the official number on Google is a squillion. Official number is a squillion searches on Google for the word leadership.
Yeah.
And I think on Amazon there's something close to, I think it's something like 70,000 books with the subject leadership, some relation to leadership on Amazon's bookstore.
Yeah.
I don't know what the total number of books in print are for leadership, but it must be astronomical. So, you know, what encouraged you to add to that already, you would have to say, amazingly saturated market? And it's not a book on leading in Japan. I wrote a book on sailing in Japan. It's a book on leadership generally. And then you've got one version for India. So it's a book on leading relevant to India, I guess. But that probably came after this one, I guess. So what inspired you to think about writing a book on leadership in the first place? And tell us a little bit about the 5 E's.
Sure. Well, first of all, I never thought I'd write a book. Never say never. Lesson number 3,864, right? Never say never. You know, I was actually, I was at London Business School on a program sponsored by Randstad, again, development. And it happened to be on transformative leadership. So, you know, we were there to talk about leading Randstad into the future, about future readiness and so on. And I was assigned a coach. And we went for a walk, as you do with your coach, outside London Business School in Regent Park. And he said, Paul, let's talk about leadership, this thing called leadership. Tell me, what does exceptional leadership look like? Define it. What is the exceptional leader? It's a great question, by the way. And I would encourage anyone to ask their colleagues the same question. And so I went on, and the story goes that he tells me later. I went on for about 20 minutes with my thoughts on leadership. And he paused and he said, Paul, you got to write a book. And I laughed it off. But what I realized later, after reflecting a bit, you know, I have some ideas about leadership because I've been a student of leadership. And I didn't realize until I was asked the question that I actually had pretty well formulated ideas about leadership. I even had a model which didn't have a proper name yet, but it had 5 E's. I'd been using this informally for many, many years across borders, using it myself to guide as a leader. And so he suggested I write a book. I kind of forgot about it. Got back to Japan. I had dinner with a friend, a common friend, a very famous author, Honda Ken, who's, you know, the best-selling author, I think, in Japan. And we were chatting about things, whatever. And then over dinner, he said, Paul, you got to write a book. I thought, Ken, I just heard this about a month ago in London. He goes, yeah, you need to write a book. And he explained, how writing a book can help you reflect and think and put your ideas on paper and makes you stronger. So, okay, great, thank you. Put it aside. I have no idea how to write a book. Then I saw a quote from Richard Branson, which kind of pushed me over the edge. He said that if you think you've had an interesting life, it's your duty to write a book and share your story with the world. Now, the thing is about that, everybody's had an interesting life. I've never met anyone who hasn't had an interesting life. So I thought, okay, I got to do this. So that's where it began. And, Greg, I'm sure you went through the same thing, but I had no idea how to write a book. But I made a commitment. I knew that if you're going to do something difficult, you got to make time for it. You got to commit. Okay. So I said, Saturday mornings from 8 to 10 a.m., I'm going to sit on my balcony in Bangalore, overlooking Bangalore, with my laptop and a coffee, and I'm going to write this book. 2 hours a week, I'm going to commit 100% to focusing on the book. So I sat down and I started writing the book. Well, backspace. I kept, after 2 hours, I had a blank sheet. I thought, wow, this is not as easy as just sitting down and writing a book.
Yeah.
This is going to be tough. Yeah. So you know what I did next? I went to Google. How to write a book.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of websites, YouTube and so on. So I came up with my own method. Basically what I did was I went back to that scene, walking outside London Business School, and I thought, okay, I'd like to talk about leadership. I know the book's going to be about leadership. I don't want it to be preachy. I decided what I wanted it to be and what it not to be. I didn't want it to be theoretical. I didn't want it to be kind of, preachy and from the guru's perspective, no algorithm, no charts. I wanted it to be full of stories, anecdotes, a conversation, a narrative. Okay, good. Now how to do it? Then I thought, well, I like talking about leadership. I'll record my voice. So I recorded on my phone about 100 voice clips sitting out on that balcony on the Saturday mornings, random stories from my journey, whether in the karate dojo or on the ice hockey rink or in the boardroom and so on. And then I went back and I revisited those and I started to write. That process took from January until October when the book was done.
That's pretty quick, though. If it's only 2 hours a day,
that's
once a week.
Well, the final,
that's pretty good.
The last mile was a lot more hours, let me tell you. I had a lot of sleepless nights. I worked through the night and but it got it done. Yeah.
The thing too, I'm impressed. Maybe I heard it on Andrew Hankinson's podcast with you when you spoke with Andrew, that you mentioned that you did the audio recording of the book.
Yeah.
And I did the audio recording of my book too. And I have to tell you, the writing of the book was a piece of cake compared to doing the recording. That is seriously hard work. I never imagined it was that hard. And I do 6 podcasts a week, so I'm used to recording. But when I did that book, my God, recording it, that was just killing me. When you told me, or you told Andrew, in his Now in Zen podcast that you did the recording, I thought, oh, wow, hats off to you, because I know how hard that is.
That was a great experience.
Well done.
Great experience. Yeah, in fact, it's just gone live. It's on Amazon now, and I saw it ranked in the top 50 yesterday in Audible.
Very good.
Yeah, so...
Well, give us a quick, what are these 5 E's that you've come up with? Just give us a quick overview of the 5 E's. So 5 E's of, I would say, exceptional leadership. The first one is envision. We've talked about it today. The exceptional leaders that I've studied over history, again, genres and so on, it's amazing. It's a common denominator. They all had a powerful vision. And the vision was not rooted in what. It was always why. Okay.
And Jim Rohn said it, right? When the why is clear, how is easy. Get that right, everything else falls in place. So a compelling vision that touches hearts and minds. That's the key. That's the very first step, the vision. So envision. Then, of course, you've got the vision. Then you got to open up the door, go outside, and tell the world about it. That's express, the second E. And that's where omni-channel comes in. Employing the omni-channel approach to expressing in a strategic way. And that's where you need help. And by the way, that's when I talk to my marketing team, because they're experts at this. You start expressing a compelling vision. Well, if you get this right, something happens. The third E comes, excite. And excite is one of the important qualities of a leader, the ability to influence people to action. So you've got a great vision. It's compelling. It touches hearts and minds. You've expressed it in a way which is in the line of sight and ears and hitting the hearts and minds again. The next step is when people start to actually lean in and want to take action, be part of it. That excitement phase is a moment of truth. This is where a lot of leaders, I think, get it wrong. I've been there. This is when the leader needs to shift into the fourth E mode, which is enable. The team is excited about the compelling vision. They're leaning in. They want to be part of it. Where a lot of leaders, again, get it wrong, and I've done it, is they get in the way. It's actually the moment to step out of the way and become an enabler from the side. Let people run with it. Create an arena where they can shine. And then the 50, of course, is always, until the end of time will be the ultimate measurement, execute. Bring that vision to reality.
So we've got envision,
Yep.
we've got express,
Yep.
we've got excite, we've got enable, and we've got execute of the 5 E's. So it's called the rule of
That's the
5,
India version, yeah.
right?
The rule
And
of
the
5.
English version is called
Yeah.
the 5 E movement. E5 movement.
Yeah.
So why did you call it a movement? That's interesting.
This is something I've kind of discovered in recent years, maybe, well, not just in India. Some of the volunteer work I've done with Hope International, I'm sure you know as well. I really think that ultimate leadership, what Peter Drucker says, is not about being the smartest person. It's actually about influencing people around you towards a cause. And when you get that right, that's the movement. Jim Collins in Good to Great talks about the flywheel. That's the flywheel. Every single day, one little push. But imagine if 2 people, 3 people, 1,000 people are coming every single day to push that wheel. That's a movement. And then you simply step aside and become the enabler. So for me, I really think that game-changing leadership is about creating a movement towards a cause, a purpose.
So if you were going to give some advice to someone who's been sent to Japan, okay, we want you to go to Japan, run the operation there. They're not going to be sleeping on a park bench like you. They'll be camped out at the Ritz-Carlton, I'm sure. But they still won't know Japan, and they won't know the culture. And they'll come into an existing team, which you've done. You've built a team, but you've also come into existing teams. So you've had both experiences. They'll have an existing team, and maybe their job is to build it or improve it or fix it or whatever it might be. What would be some words of advice you'd give someone new to Japan? A couple of pieces of advice for them to think about on their journey here as a leader in Japan.
Every culture is unique in its own way, and I think what worked in the place you were yesterday might not work today, but some of it will. So it's about identifying what is appropriate and what's not. We've been here long enough to see folks come and go. I've been to a lot of welcome parties and a lot of goodbye parties for expats who have come through. If I were to put a kind of a simple line between the ones who have come and really created that movement versus the ones who didn't and left a bit frustrated, I think it comes down to some simple things. First of all, the beginner's mind. Arriving with the beginner's mind, Shoshin, absolutely. Put your white belt back on. It didn't really matter who you were in France yesterday, in the US, in Germany, in China. You're in a new place and it's about learning. And so I think the first 60 to 90 days is so important to connect and get out there, get out of the office, get into the gemba, get into the field, meet, talk to people, listen. That's one key element. How you start will dictate how you finish in Japan. I absolutely believe that. I think the other thing is, we hear about patience. This is a long game. And I think this is something that's foreign to many of us who come from outside Japan. We tend to be, in our cultures, very action-oriented. I know Aussies are. Canadians are the same way. All right, let's go. Well, in Japan, you got to take the time to go through the process of discussing and listening and valuing opinions. You can call it consensus. It's not a full democracy. At the end of the day, the leader must make the decision, but the decision should be had after that process has happened. So a lot of leaders get frustrated with that. You gotta shift the gear to be to really get things done here. I think, by the way, when you get it right in Japan, the possibilities are endless. When you don't, it can be extremely frustrating. I think the next thing is probably surrounding yourself with people that have navigated through this maze of Japan. I did the same thing in India. First thing I did was hunt down people who have been around for a while, that have had success.
These are expats?
Expats as well as Indians, global-minded Indians, to really understand. So I think in Japan as well, you can surround yourself with expats who have had a degree of success. And many people who appeared on your show, by the way, are great examples of that. Certainly Harry Hill and Mike Alfon are great examples of people that I would talk to if I were coming into a new place like Japan. Also, I would say global-minded Japanese leaders who have that perspective, who can kind of bridge when they kind of see the challenge that you're facing as well. Ask for advice. I think we all learn this as we get older and more mature, that asking for advice is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. Coming to Japan and having completely lost and no idea what's happening here, that's a normal feeling. Ask for advice. Surround yourself with people who can, give you tips and guide you.
Should they learn Japanese?
Well, yeah, this is a tough one. I think I've seen leaders who have come here who've been pretty effective not speaking Japanese. I admire these leaders because I really believe that speaking Japanese is a huge asset in Japan. I think in any culture.
They're going to be here probably 3 to 5 years. Is it realistic to start learning in 3 to 5 years?
I think it's a great idea to start learning even if you're going to be here 6 months because it sends out a message to the organization that, you're walking the talk, you're a learner, you're trying. And let's face it, all of us who first arrived in Japan 31 years ago, the first time we used even 1 or 2 words of Japanese to the taxi driver, and the taxi driver said, "Wow, you speak great Japanese, right? Pera pera." Yeah, we've all been there, right? Yeah. People appreciate it, the effort. It's less important about the result. I absolutely encourage anyone who's going to come to Japan before you get on the plane, learn 10 words of Japanese. It will never be a negative. It will never be a minus or a disadvantage.
That's true. Yeah, there's no downside, is there, in this country? No
and try. But, the leaders who come here and use an interpreter through their entire time here in business, I find that to be amazing. I personally, I would find that real tough to talk through someone to get the message across. But it's a reality that many expats face. For me,
one thing about interpreters too, which people don't appreciate, is it's usually consecutive interpreting as opposed to simultaneous. So I speak, I shut up, the interpreter speaks, then I start again. You have to be incredibly disciplined to do that because you've got to have your thought. And you can't download the entire thought in one sentence because it's impossible for the interpreter to remember it. So you have to take the thought, break it down into little bite-sized chunks, give that bit, they interpret that. You've got to keep remembering, okay, now I go to the next chunk, now I go to the next chunk. That is not an easy process. And sometimes I've been in that, I'll start saying something, they'll interpret, and I've lost track of what the hell I was going to say and the whole point because it's taken so long. Because, 10 words in English takes much longer in Japanese to say the same thing. So even interpreting is, as someone using an interpreter, that is a skill of concentration and having to hold that thought right the way through. Not easy.
That's one piece of advice I would give to any leader who's coming into an organization where language will be an issue, is double the amount of time you would normally expect for something to take in terms of a meeting. So because of the translation and because, sometimes the translation is not quite right and the interpreter even needs to ask for clarification. That takes extra time as well. But no, speaking a bit of the language is good. The other thing is spend time with people outside the office. There is something about not only Japan, but many cultures. In the office environment, people are hesitant to speak up. But the moment you go off-site, have a lunch, have a coffee, in the evening, go out for a drink, if that's, something you like to do. One day when we're able to. But, I find that's where you have the best conversations. And people won't speak up in the meeting, especially if there's a hierarchy. Fine, let's go have a drink. Let's go have a coffee. So, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I would say I'm probably going to be the world champion within Randstad of all the MDs on the coffee budget. I'm going to spend a lot of money on coffees in Randstad Japan.
Money worth spent, I'm sure.
You got it.
Paul, thank you very much. In fact, I know for a fact this is actually a 15-hour interview, but we can't do the 15 hours. So we've only had just a thin skating across the surface of this discussion with you. But I'm going to enjoy reading your book, and I'm going to look forward to coming back to you after I've had a chance to read the book. But I certainly encourage everyone else, you can get the book, where they get this book, on Amazon.
On Amazon, yeah.
So the E5 movement, Paul Dupuis, The Leadership Through the Rule of Five. So you can get that on Amazon. Great book, worthwhile having. So thank you very much for joining us for this latest episode of Japan's top business interviews.